Okay, we want to welcome Alison Tierney tonight to Gilda's Club. We are going to be talking about reducing cancer risk with cancer risk and its recurrence with plant-based nutrition. It is so great to see everybody here tonight, and thank you for being here. And without further ado, I am turning it over to our esteemed guest. Thank you.
Well, and I just wanted to ask you about timing. How much time do you want me to leave for Q&A at the end?
20 minutes.
Okay, because we go to 7:30, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Sounds great. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm very excited to be here with you all today. And I live not too far from you all. I know generally in the Madison area there. I'm out in Oconomowoc, so not too far from you guys, a little bit closer to Milwaukee. And tonight I was asked to talk about food as medicine, and I also kind of rethemed this presentation as reducing cancer risk and its recurrence with plant-based nutrition. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and get into a little bit further. And again, we'll have some Q&A afterwards as well. And since it is so hot, I'm leaving my office door open. I'm at my home office and I got 2 little kiddos. So at some point I might have to get up and close the door when it's bedtime and everything. So otherwise I'll just start beating sweat because this is like one of the warmest rooms in the house. So I just wanted to give you that heads up. All right, so I had mentioned previously, as some people were logging into the presentation, that tonight is actually going to be an interactive presentation if you'd like it to be. So what that means is you can go ahead, you can take your smartphone and you can take a photo with the QR code and it'll pop up this presentation to you. And what's going to happen is I've prompted some questions in the presentation. They're not quiz questions or anything like that. And you can anonymously answer. So for example, we'll get to the first question very soon, but it is truly like, what brings you to the presentation today? Are you currently going through cancer treatment? Are you post-treatment? Are you a support or caregiver, etc.? So you can also, what I'll do is I'll copy this link for you. I'm going to put it into the chat. You can also click that link and it will take you to this presentation. Now, I do want to let you know that if you are watching this presentation solely on your phone, you can absolutely do that. You just won't be able to see the real-time update results of when people add things into the interactive portion, but I'll talk about the results. Otherwise, so just wanted to give you that. If you have a desktop, use your phone and you'll follow along the presentation and I'll help walk you through it as we go. And it's a super fun way to kind of get you guys involved, for me to know a little bit more about you, and we'll go from there. Another thing that I also want to note, at the end of the presentation, I will have another slide where it has a very specific URL specifically just to this presentation in Gilda's Club, or another QR code, however you like to use it. And you'll be able to grab all the PDF slides from this presentation. I will have them automatically emailed to you after the presentation, as long as you put your name and email. That's how I get it sent to you. And then also there's going to be an extra handout that you can grab as well that goes along with the presentation. So just wanted to let you guys know that, so that when we get through the presentation, if you're trying to take really quick notes, know that you will have every PDF slide as we go through this at the end, if you'd like to. All right. So hopefully everybody that does want to participate in the interaction has that all set up, and we're just going to take it away from here. All right. So today, just a little bit about the objectives. I'm not going to, read these very closely, but I want you to know what the role of an oncology dietitian is, both in cancer treatment and survivorship. And the reason that I want to go through just a little bit of this is that, so for individuals that might be going through recurrent treatment, how they can utilize an oncology dietitian, or those into survivorship, how you can know an oncology dietitian can be a support for you, whether you're just out of treatment, you're 5 years out of treatment, 10 years out of treatment, how a dietitian could be helpful to you. We're also going to review some nutrition recommendations set forth by the national and international agencies to reduce the risk of cancer development through nutrition and lifestyle. So I am a very evidence-based dietitian. And what that means is all of my recommendations are based on available research and these World Health Organizations. So I'm not just making anything up, I'm presenting what we know. And if there's something that I present to you that we don't know fully and there's still some ambiguity or anything, I will mention that for sure. Also, we're going to talk about the benefits of a plant-based diet and how it may actually help reduce the risk of cancer development and its recurrence. We're going to investigate nutrients of concern and things that we want to focus on if somebody is pursuing a plant-based diet, or what I like to call a plant-forward diet. From the get-go here, I think sometimes when people see plant-based, they think like, oh my gosh, I don't want to be vegan or vegetarian or anything of the like. If that is you, let me calm your nerves by saying nobody is saying that, not even me. But plant-based and plant-forward it can mean different things. Plant-based can mean 100% plant-based if someone would like to choose to, meaning that they are vegan or vegetarian, or it can really truly just mean plant-forward. I support both directions, no matter what an individual is looking for. So when I say plant-based, please also think and use the word plant-forward, right? We're going to talk about how these things can be beneficial no matter where you fall on that spectrum. And then also, I'm going to provide some recommendations of how to begin implementing plant-based nutrition approach for those of you that might be interested to take some of these things that we talk about today and apply them to your everyday life. Now, as you can imagine, we're not going to get through everything that's nutrition and cancer related here today, but I hope to be able to highlight these things for you so that you can have a really good, strong understanding about why we want to talk about some of these things, and then also take the next steps of how to start implementing them. All right. So this is the first interactive portion of it. So if you're following it, and I'll read these because I don't know how big it is on your screen, but what option best reflects you as you join this presentation? Are you currently in cancer treatment? Are you into survivorship after treatment? Or are you a support or caregiver? And I'm going to let people kind of just take a little bit to answer these questions. You should be able to start seeing some of the feedback here where we have so far 78% have completed cancer treatment. And by any type, I mean whether it's surgery, chemo, radiation, endocrine therapy, the list goes on, immunotherapy. Some of you are currently going through cancer treatment. And just so you know, anywhere you fall in this spectrum, the things that we talk about today can be very applicable no matter where you are. However, some of the recommendations that if you are working with a dietitian during cancer treatment, some of these things aren't necessarily going to be something that you can apply today, depending on any side effects you might be experiencing during treatment. So I'll get into that a little bit here. All right, so it looks like we have a majority of you have completed your cancer treatment, but some of you are currently going through cancer treatment. All right. Now, just to tell you a little bit about myself, and some people are very interested in my professional path, but what I'm actually going to do, I actually wanted to show this slide a little bit first. So I am an oncology dietitian, and what that means is I'm a registered dietitian that is board certified in oncology nutrition. So I have that RD degree, and then I also have a subspecialty in the oncology nutrition. And that requires several different things, and 2,000 hours of practice hours in oncology, and then sitting for a boards exam and recertifying for that boards exam every 5 years. So in terms of the grand scheme of things, when it comes to dietitians, there's only 800 oncology dietitians in the country. So we are definitely a much more subspecialty of individuals. Now, a lot of people will ask me, Alison, why did you want to be an oncology dietitian? Why did you want to get into this space? Okay. And all of these people here on this page are what prompted me to become an oncology dietitian. On the top left corner is my grandfather, who unfortunately lost his battle to liver cancer in 2010. My paternal grandmother is both a breast and uterine cancer survivor. My maternal grandmother, who unfortunately is not pictured with me because she passed away before I was born, passed away from lung cancer. When I was in college, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer and is also a thyroid cancer survivor. And my godmother is also a breast cancer survivor. So as you can imagine, there was a lot of cancer in my family, and I started asking a lot of questions. Now, I'm going to go a little bit back to that slide and show you a little bit of that professional path for myself. So when I first went to college, I went to school for business administration with leadership and management. And I chose that path because it was kind of a family thing to do, right? My dad has owned and run multiple businesses. Nobody in my family was really science related. And I just kind of thought it was the thing that I should do next, even though I wanted to be a dietitian when I was in high school. And most of my experience in nutrition and my love for nutrition at the time was absolutely 100% related to sports nutrition. I was an athlete all the way through college, and I wanted to know how could nutrition help improve my performance. But when I was a freshman in college is when my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. When I was a senior in college is when my grandfather was diagnosed with liver cancer. And many of these questions that I started having was, could nutrition help alter these paths? Could it help to during the course of treatment, and could it help post treatment? Well, as you can imagine, I wouldn't be presenting to you today if we didn't find that nutrition can play a role in all three of these areas. So after I graduated with my business degree from the University of St. Thomas in St. Paul, Minnesota, I ended up going back to school, getting a second bachelor's degree which is called a coordinated program. And I became a outpatient oncology dietitian straight out the gate from that. I actually asked every single one of my professors, like, I want to be an oncology dietitian. I want every experience possible. And I ended up getting an internship at a well-known, nationally well-known cancer center where I was an intern, and they hired me on full-time right after my internship, and worked there for a few years before I ended up moving to the UW Cancer Center at Pro Healthcare. And there is when I actually finished my master's degree in nutrition and fitness, and I started this business of Wholesome LLC. And the reason why I started this was truly because I wanted to help broaden the nutrition information and that knowledge gap beyond just the one cancer center that I was working at to even farther. In 2016, after getting the credentialing hours that I needed, I sat for the boards exam. And then in 2019, I made the decision with my family that I would sit down and exclusively focus on Wholesome so that, again, I can spread the knowledge of nutrition. And I recently recertified. Now, this is my professional path, and I shared with you very briefly about my family's path. So as you can see, my passion for this runs very deep, okay? But one thing that a lot of people don't know is that every single person on this page is a cancer survivor, and that includes me. I am a breast cancer survivor. I have a genetic mutation called CHEK2. So I'm not sure if anybody here has that same genetic mutation. So when I was diagnosed with breast cancer, this whole thing became even more personal, as you can imagine. So I can relate to many of you that are here today and might have questions about nutrition. And so we're going to start diving into that right away. All right, so before we officially get started, I kind of alluded to a little bit, but try to get into this is based before you came today. What option best reflects your understanding or opinion of nutrition as it relates to cancer? Is it that nutrition plays a large role in reducing risk and improving your quality of life? Or maybe you're not sure, or you've been told that nutrition doesn't play a role, or that you don't believe nutrition matters in this whole scheme of things. All right, we're coming out so far about where I expected. So I'll let a few more of you come in here. And as you can imagine, as an oncology dietitian, I believe very passionately about nutrition and cancer. And not just cancer, but also many different autoimmune disease, chronic diseases, and how nutrition can play a role in these entire processes. So far we have 91% say that believe that nutrition plays a large role, and 9% who aren't really sure. I wasn't quite expecting anybody to answer, I don't believe nutrition matters, because you probably wouldn't be at a presentation like this today if you didn't think that, but you never know. And I have worked with many different physicians, and there are still people out there that believe that nutrition plays absolutely no role in any of this, whether it mean helping to reduce the risk or even help during the course of treatment. And I think I'll show you here that it does make a difference. All right, so just a couple of things to know. I'm not going to go into the stats too much, but however, in 2020, it was estimated that 1.8 million new cases of cancer would be diagnosed in the United States, and that 600,000 people would die from the disease. Also, cancer deaths are estimated to be related to 1/3 smoking, but also 1/3 overweight, obesity, physical inactivity, and poor diet. So from those people that I've heard before that nutrition plays no role or lifestyle plays no role, you can see here that research shows that that's not true. Now, where does the other 1/3 fall into that? Well, as you can imagine, it's a whole host of things, right? It could be genetic mutations. It could be other things that cancer deaths result in terms of complications from surgeries or chemotherapies and treatments. It could be a whole host of things. But I just wanted to make the point that nutrition and lifestyle does play a role. Also, that nutrients can play roles at different stages within the carcinogenic process. So carcinogenic means cancer causing. So nutrition and specific nutrients within our diets can actually play a role in all the different areas of the carcinogenic process. So this is my visual version of cell development of cancer. So really what this means, obviously this is very simplified, but what typically happens is we have a normal cell, okay? Now that normal cell that's operating and functioning normally will start to have DNA damage, okay? So that DNA is what makes us uniquely us as individuals and tells us if our hair is brown or if our eyes are blue and all those things. But simply by living life, it is completely inevitable that there will be DNA damage over time, okay? DNA damage can come from different chemicals or oxidation. Oxidation, it gets down into like losing an electron. You've probably heard of antioxidants, right? That help repair oxidation or damage to the cell that's happened. Inflammation, viruses, radiation. Also, I mentioned genetic mutations. Genetic mutations can happen here too, because a genetic mutation, if there is a genetic mutation in a gene, then it means that that normal cell is never actually normal, right? Because it can't protect the body against what it needs to. Now, genetic damage, I have an arrow here that goes back and forth. It is completely normal, like I said, by living life, that genetic damage happens. Genetic damage can happen and our cells can repair itself. Or it can continue on in this direction, okay? Where initiated cell, where there's that mutation from whatever reason, right? It could be the sun, it could be exposure to something, it could be the genetic mutation, it could be poor diet, physical inactivity, hormone imbalance, it could be a lot of different things. And let me also start by saying, as a dietitian, yes, I love nutrition, and we're going to talk about nutrition a ton here because that's my specialty. But there are many, many factors that go into this. So I am not saying that by any means that, oh, if someone had this perfect type of diet, cancer would have never happened. We can never say that because there are so many other confounding factors or factors that play a role. So the way I want you to think about nutrition is that nutrition is a factor that can play a role that is something that we can have more control over. There are so many things in cancer development, in the cancer journey, whether it be treatment, that we have zero control over. Nutrition is something that we can have some control over. So I want you to think about this as controlling the controllables. There's no blame here. There's no perfection or anything like that. I want this presentation to help empower you, to help show you that, hey, there are some things that I can do to help my risk of recurrence, but there is no guarantee in anything. So we're going for empowerment and we're going for reducing our risk, okay? So that genetic damage or that DNA damage can happen back and forth, and nutrition can play a role in all of these different levels, helping to actually maybe potentially reverse that damage, or helping to prevent that cancer progression from growing bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm going to show you how nutrition plays a role in that. Now, quickly, I just want to show the role of the outpatient oncology dietitian. You'll also notice these numbers that I put next to everything in here. These are my references. At the end of the slides, you'll be able to look at every reference that I put in here. I believe I put links to all the articles too. So if that's something that you do want to go check out, when you get the PDFs, you'll have full access to do that and where I'm citing that from. So nutrition intervention, such as working with an oncology dietitian, making recommendations, has been shown to actually help during cancer treatment, to help fewer treatment-related side effects, reduce hospitalizations, and actually improve quality of life. I have a dear friend that was recently diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma and just started chemotherapy Friday, I believe was her first day, and she was texting me and she's like, man, my mouth sores hurt so bad, right? And some of you can probably relate to that. And I made the very simple recommendation of baking soda, salt, rinse. And she's like, this is the first time I did it, but it actually helped reduce the stinging, right? That's a very simple example about how an oncology dietitian can help. But if those mouth sores continue to perpetuate for her, she's going to have a lot more trouble being able to eat throughout the course of treatment to help keep her nourished. So that's just a very simple example of how someone can help during the course of treatment. Some of the things many of you are very familiar with and probably are experiencing or have experienced before. These are potential nutrition related concerns or things that dietitians can help with during the course of treatment, such as these treatment side effects. I just mentioned mouth sores, which is mucositis, fatigue, pain, loss of appetite, immunosuppression, etc. These are all things an oncology dietitian can help a patient with. Now, if we focus on these things, here are some research has shown that we actually have potential outcomes of being able to adhere to our treatment, our scheduled treatment better, fewer infections, improved body weight and composition, delay or prevention of disease progression, which we all want, improved chances of survival, and improved quality of life. Okay. Now, when it comes to post-treatment, okay, let's say now this could be very like really quickly after treatment, or this could be several years out because there are some late side effects from treatment as well. So such as fatigue, pain, endocrine disorders. Endocrine could be like hormone, for example, thyroid type issues, but also weight and body composition changes, cognitive defects, even dental caries. These are more related to head and neck type cancers, cardiovascular, heart disease type related things, or decreased bone density, which we see often more in the prostate and breast cancer populations. Now, what can we help with? What has research shown that nutrition interventions can help with? Reduce our fatigue. I mean, who doesn't want more energy, right? I do. Who doesn't want more? I'm a mom of 2 and run my own business. More energy, please. Improve functional status, rapid recovery from treatment, improve weight, decrease risk of cancer recurrence and subsequent primary cancers, improve chances of survival, improve quality of life, and decrease healthcare costs. Now, with that being said, I wish that all dietitian services, especially for oncology, were covered with insurance, because we could argue with our insurance right here that we're going to decrease healthcare related costs if somebody can work with a dietitian. Unfortunately, our healthcare field is not there yet, especially insurances, and we need to keep pushing for that, at least from a dietitian perspective, because employing a dietitian early can actually save down the road costs when it relates to healthcare. All right, so next we're going to go into what's called the third expert report. This is a report that is completely free online. It's super extensive. It has a lot of research in there if you want to. I usually tell people if you're not like a nutrition nerd or science nerd like myself and you need something to help put you to sleep at night, this report will do it, right? The book is like this thick, goes through all the studies, tells you, how they came across their recommendations and so forth. We're going to go over the recommendations, like the overall recommendations here. But what this is a worldly report. So it's not just the United States, but their goal between the World Cancer Research Fund and the American Institute for Cancer Research was to help identify how diet, nutrition, and physical activity was related to cancer. So in 2017, they recently reported this third expert report, which means that it was their third report. Every 10 years, they update the report, but they are continuously updating the report between those 10 years. So if you go to their website, you can actually look up at different cancer types between breast, prostate, pancreatic, et cetera, and I will give you the summary of research. And then you'll also notice that as the years go on, there might be a new breast cancer one, or there might be a new prostate updated one between those 10 years, because these individuals, the experts that are doing this, are constantly doing it. It's just that they put out a main report every 10 years. Okay, it's a very extensive analysis and meticulous methods and experts across the world that help make these recommendations. Some of them you're going to probably be like, duh, I knew that. And some of them you're going to be like, oh yeah. So we'll go through those here. So the first and foremost recommendation is to aim to be at a healthy body weight. However, what is important here is that you want to be at a healthy body weight, but also not underweight, okay? However, although this is the first recommendation on this report, as a dietitian, I want to make you know that this is only one data point, okay? Some people look at this and like, oh my gosh, I have to be a healthy weight, and try, and also sometimes ignore the other parts of this. And I personally and professionally, based on the research available, if you focus on all of these other aspects as best you can, and you're not in a healthy weight range, you still have so many great benefits. Again, healthy weight, one data point, okay? Also trying to be physically active as part of everyday life. This doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be participating in P90X or some of these like intense exercise classes. If you love those, awesome. If you don't and you enjoy biking or walking or doing any of those things, gardening, whatever it is, that counts. Being physically active as part of everyday life. Now, a little tidbit here, one of my favorite things that experts have studied, something called the blue zones. I'm not sure if you guys know how to use it, but if you know how to raise your hand in the Zoom, has anybody heard of the blue zones before? No? Awesome. I'm excited that you haven't because there's so much cool information here. The blue zones are the 5 areas of the world where there are the most number of centenarians, or people that live to be 100 or greater. Now, not only do they live to be 100 or greater, they live high quality lives to 100 or greater, right? I've always said, if I'm going to live to 100, I want to be doing what I want to do, right? And these individuals are. So they wanted to study, why do these areas of the world have these individuals and what is common among all of them? And so you know where those 5 areas of the world we have, there's one in Okinawa, Japan, we have one in Italy, Greece, Costa Rica, and believe it or not, the United States has one in Loma Linda, California, which is shocking, right? Because unfortunately, the United States is one of the most developed countries, but actually has some of the worst health outcomes of developed countries. So the reason I bring this up is you can study their commonalities among these different blue zones, but they all have drastically different cultures. One of the things that they all have in common is physical activity as part of everyday life. And they don't necessarily exercise. They walk to the grocery store. They ride their bike to the park or something like that. Now, depending on where we live, we don't all have the capability of that, but we can do these in small little increments in our lifestyle, such as parking the farthest way at the grocery store, right? Walking to the coffee shop if it's safe to do so, or again, making it part of everyday life. As you can imagine, there's also a nutrition thing they all have in common, which is they call plant slant, which means a plant forward diet. All right, so when it comes to the next recommendation, the recommendation of the third expert report is to eat a diet that's rich in whole grains, vegetables, fruit, and beans. So this is what is called a plant-based or a plant-forward diet. This does not mean that it has to be exclusion of the other things here like meat, dairy, eggs, etc. But making most of your diet these types of foods, okay? You can get into some more of the nit and gritty here, that having at least 30 grams of fiber per day. I don't want to get into those nit and gritty details just at this point, but again, you can always go back to this slide. The other recommendation is to help limit the consumption of what's considered fast foods or ultra processed foods that unfortunately so many of us do have in our regular diets. And part of that is because of what's available. Part of it is because that's what's easy, and many of us live incredibly busy lives. But we do want to try to reduce the amount of these highly processed foods, whether they're plant-based processed foods or whether they're animal-based processed foods. We want to try to limit these as much as possible. Recommendation number 5 is to limit the consumption of red and processed meat. And this is most highly linked to colorectal type cancers that we definitely want to be careful of, especially processed meat. Processed meat actually is on the group 1 carcinogen list of American Cancer Society. So a group 1 carcinogen by definition is known to cause cancer in humans, and deli meats, processed meats are part of that group 1 carcinogen, which is also where smoking lies, for example. So that's kind of where some of this recommendation lies. Also, we have to limit the consumption of sugar sweetened beverages. This is probably not a surprise for very many people. I always say I'd rather consume my calories than drink my calories. That's a personal preference, but we want to try to stick with water, unsweetened tea, those types of beverages. Coffee is also okay. Actually, all those things have really great benefits to it, but trying to reduce these sugar sweetened beverages. Especially for us Wisconsinites, most people don't like to see this recommendation, but to limit our alcohol consumption. Alcohol, it's actually not the alcohol itself that is the carcinogen. It is the alcohol that gets converted in our body to something called acetaldehyde. That, unfortunately, is the thing that can increase cancer risk. Alcohol, of course, many people are familiar that it is linked to liver cancer. But for example, more common one that individuals is breast cancer, for example, because research has shown that it can actually increase estrogen production, which many breast cancers are estrogen receptor positive, meaning they're fueled by estrogen, and alcohol can unfortunately contribute to that. Now, what's considered moderation? This agency considers moderation 1 drink per day for women and 2 drinks per day for men. Personally and professionally, I still think that's a high recommendation, but that is what this recommendation is. And it does not count that if you don't have it during the week, I can have 7 drinks on Saturday. It does not work like that, unfortunately, for many people. Okay. All right. And also recommendation of not to use supplements for cancer prevention. Now, it doesn't mean that any supplement, some supplements can definitely be helpful, but please keep in mind is that some supplements, especially in high amounts, can actually be harmful to us. So for example, there's been some in high amounts, I believe it's vitamin E for lung cancer patients who are going through radiation, supplementation of vitamin E, which is an antioxidant, right? Which is actually vitamin E in our foods is a good thing, but high supplementation has actually been shown to show progression of the disease. So we want to try to aim to meet our nutrition needs through diet alone and supplement where it's necessary, okay? And that can vary for everybody. Number 9, for mothers to breastfeed their baby if they can. Not everybody has that choice to be able to do that because some people undergo breast cancer treatment, mastectomies, etc. They cannot breastfeed a child afterwards, or some people just don't have the ability to breastfeed, whether it be physically or the support. Whether you're out of this childbearing age and so forth, we also want to try to consider supporting other women who are at this age to try to make that environment more supportive for them. Breastfeeding protects the mother and the child against cancer. And also after a cancer diagnosis, it's recommended to follow these recommendations. However, it does depend on some of these recommendations might not be able to be followed during the course of cancer treatment, depending on somebody's side effects. So for example, if someone's experiencing diarrhea during the course of treatment, eating all the broccoli is not going to be beneficial to them because it can cause a lot more exacerbation of that diarrhea. Again, that's where working with a dietitian or another professional can be helpful to manage those side effects and make these recommendations more effective. All right, so I wanted to bring this back to you just as a reminder to show that nutrition can impact all of this area of progression. And keep in mind, it keeps coming back to DNA damage, right? And the reason I want you to know that is because that's one of the ways that nutrition can play a huge role is to help reduce DNA damage. Okay, we'll keep getting to that. This might be kind of small on your screen, I'm not sure. But again, it'll be available in the PDFs. This is a figure from the Third World Expert Report of all of the factors that have been shown to contribute to the cancer process, right? Just like I mentioned before, where diet is not the only thing, right? And there are some things that are completely out of our control. But as you can imagine, there are some things here that are within our control, or at least can be influenced by our control. Our genetics cannot, right? Our age cannot. Our gender cannot. Right, but some of these other things can. Our microbiome, that would require an entirely different presentation for me, but our microbiome, which is that bacteria that lives within us, actually can be influenced by our diet and lifestyle in very positive ways. Again, here's diet and lifestyle factors. Again, these are controllable: nutrients, energy intake, phytochemicals, which we'll get to, and then also environmental factors. Some of these we have zero control over, right? Like when you step outside your door, you have zero control over what the world's pollution is, right? We can manage some of that on an individual level as much as we can, such as the products we choose, the type of exposures we might expose ourselves to, right? You don't want to be secondhand or thirdhand smoke, for example. But again, this is just showing you the many different ways of things that can contribute, but that many of these can be influenced by our diet and lifestyle. All right, so I mentioned plant-based diets and how, what I wanted to get to is some of the common misconceptions about plant-based diets, right? It is commonly thought that a vegan or vegetarian diet is not healthy and that it puts somebody at risk. However, I wanted to point out to you that this is the position of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which is our professional organization as dietitians. And it states here that the position of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is that appropriately planned vegetarian, including vegan diets, are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide health benefits for prevention of certain treatment of certain diseases. And what I didn't blow up here, but it actually is that at any part of the lifestyle, that includes pregnancy, lactation, childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and older age, and even athletes. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit briefly about that, but I wanted you to know that there are, these professional standards that these can be incredibly beneficial for us. Now, digging a little bit deeper into the report, some of the things that I specifically wanted to pull out for cancer is that research shows that vegetarian diets are actually associated with lower overall cancer risk, including especially gastrointestinal cancers such as colon cancer, rectal cancer, anal cancer, etc., are all associated with better protection. And then you pull out this even bigger one is that a vegan diet appears to have a greater protection against overall cancer incidence than any other dietary pattern there is. Now, one thing that I want to point out here is dietary pattern, okay? It is not one food or the lack of including one food that can help reduce one's risk. It is the overall dietary pattern. I wish, right, that I could say, go ahead, eat this food every single day and you'll cut your cancer risk by 99.9%, right? It doesn't work like that. It is the overall dietary pattern. But when we talk about plant-based diets, we see that it is the most protective and for many different reasons, which I'll show you why. Also a meta-analysis. Meta-analysis means that they take all the studies that are available, all the good studies that are available, and come to a conclusion after all those studies. So 7 studies report that vegetarians have an 18% lower overall incidence of cancer than non-vegetarians. So what is all of this? Why is there benefit in the plant-based diet? Well, I'll show you. One of the biggest things is this right here, phytonutrients, okay? Many of you have probably heard of phytonutrients before. Some of you might not have, and that's okay. Phytonutrients, like I said before, I am a nutrition nerd, and I think phytonutrients are so awesome, okay? They are these disease-fighting nutrients in the foods that we eat, but only exclusive to plants because they're phyto, or phyto is the Greek word for plant. They are plant nutrients. If there are phytonutrients in animal products, it is because the animal ate plants and it built up into their system and transfers to us. But there are very, very, very minimal amounts of phytonutrients in animal-based products, but plant-based foods have all the phytonutrients, okay? They're only found in plants. They're considered natural chemicals. Another term you might hear other than phytonutrients is phytochemicals. And they have been just shown to demonstrate anti-cancer effects in laboratory studies and continues to show more studies in human studies, and are known to interfere with a number of cellular processes in the progression of cancer. So remember when I showed you that progression of the cell, right? And phytonutrients can play a role in all of those different areas, helping to prevent it from happening or helping to prevent the further damage of it as well, okay? Now, here are the findings that phytochemicals have been shown to help us to stimulate the immune system so that the immune system can say, hey, this is a bad cell, right? Remember that first cell that I showed you that started to have, it was normal and then it had DNA damage? We want our body and our immune system to say, hey, that cell is bad and we need to get rid of it. Okay, that's actually a good thing, right? So we want our immune system to do that. We want to block the substances that we eat, drink, and breathe from becoming cancerous causing or carcinogens, right? Like I said, you can step out into the earth and unfortunately we do live in pollution, right? Like some of that we can't control, we breathe that in, and that can cause some genetic damage. But what we eat can help block those substances from becoming cancer causing. Okay. Reduce inflammation, that makes cancer growth more likely. Many of you have probably heard the term inflammation before. We want to try to reduce inflammation as much as possible. Phytochemicals are the best anti-inflammatory properties we have. Also to help prevent DNA damage, which I've pounded on already a lot today, and then also to help with DNA repair. Again, meaning that the cell's already damaged and we can actually reverse the damage and go back to repair. How cool is that? Like, that's amazing, right? Food is so cool. And I know I'm a nutrition nerd, but food is cool. Also reduce oxidative damage. That's where you've heard the term antioxidants before. Can help reduce some of that damage that might happen. Slow the growth rate of cancer cells, which is especially important when we're during the course of cancer treatment. Also trigger apoptosis. Apoptosis is programmed cell death. It sounds like a bad thing, but it's actually a good thing. It goes back to our body identifying a bad cell and killing it off before it can replicate and divide, where it creates a tumor, right? So we want apoptosis to happen, and also to help regulate our hormones, okay? Whether you are a male or a female, regulating hormones, we all know that hormones rule the world, right? We know that, right? Women, you feel that. Men, you feel that in very different ways, right? Whether maybe it's your significant other or spouse or whatever it might be, but phytonutrients can actually naturally regulate these hormones from the standpoint of we want enough hormones. We don't want too much and we don't want too little. Diet can actually help naturally regulate some of these hormones. This is more specifically related to prostate cancer, breast cancers, and some gynecological cancers as well that might be hormone related. So these are just a few of the phytochemicals that I wanted to point out. The first and foremost is sulforaphane, primarily found in cruciferous vegetables such as broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. Sulforaphane is pretty exclusive to this family of cruciferous vegetables. It means that it grows in a cross formation. So think of like a cabbage, for example, right? The leaves cross over each other. That's a cruciferous vegetable. Now, like I said, there's not one food that can help prevent cancer in its entirety, but if I were to pick my favorite cancer fighting food, cruciferous vegetables would definitely top the list. Ferulic acid, which is found in a number of foods, including whole grains, fruits, and coffee. For you coffee lovers out there, people like to see that. Genistein or isoflavones. I actually didn't include this part into the presentation, but we can cover it in the Q&A if we want. Many people believe that soy is actually not beneficial against cancer. In fact, it is protective against cancer, including estrogen receptor, progesterone receptor positive cancers, and even triple negative breast cancers as well. But the best sources are soy products such as edamame, tofu, tempeh, and soy milk. If you'd like me to cover that in the Q&A, I'd be happy to do that. Curcumin, which is the powerful anti-inflammatory found in turmeric. Okay, turmeric is what gives yellow mustard its yellow color. Turmeric itself has some really great benefits, and also curcumin. All right, quercetin, which is found in a variety of foods, but especially citrus fruits, apples, onions, and parsley. And then indole-3-carbinol, which is commonly found in those cruciferous vegetables again. So just another reason to incorporate those cruciferous vegetables when you can. All right, I'm going to take a little interactive portion here. So I briefly described what phytochemicals are and what foods they are in. So remember, phytochemicals come in plants, okay? So any food that is a fruit, vegetable, whole grain, legume, or nut or seed contains phytochemicals. So I wanted to hear your participation, because sometimes when people think about a plant-based diet, they get very overwhelmed. And I want to reassure you that there are many things that have phytonutrients in it that are plant-based and you probably love. So go ahead and type in some of your favorite foods and what comes to mind, and go ahead and enter those in. There is no wrong answer. And again, this is all anonymous. Red peppers, banana, apple, 100%. We got garlic. Yes. Garlic has a very specific phytonutrient called allicin. If you forgot my name, here's how you remember it. It's Alison. And I like to joke that everybody needs a little more Alison in their life, whether it be garlic or, presentations like this. So, which garlic is an awesome phytonutrient. Let's see, we got oranges, citrus, cabbage, tomato, spinach, tempeh. Ooh, we have a tempeh lover in the group. That's exciting. Mixed greens, cashews. Awesome. This is so many good things. Olive oil does contain phytonutrients. That's fantastic because it comes from a plant. Awesome. This is wonderful. And when I think about helping people to identify that there's a lot of these foods that they already love and eat, I think about my nephews. Okay, I have 3 nephews on one side, and they're very much against anything that's like, they call it vegan, right? And I just think of plants. They're like, I don't like vegan food. And they're like, as they're eating an apple, or as they're eating ketchup, and I remind them, I'm like, you do know that apples are vegan, right? And they're like, no, it's not. And it's like, yes, it is, right? So there's a lot of foods that many of us do love that are very nutritious for us. And you guys have demonstrated that here today. The biggest one popping up is blueberries, which is awesome.
So Allison, a couple others that have come up on the chat are blueberries, apples, garlic, green beans, broccoli, cauliflower, blueberries again, broccoli again, spinach, radishes, sunflower butter from Trader Joe's, and Trader Joe's low sugar raspberry jelly.
All excellent examples. And one thing that I wanted to point out is that phytonutrients that, so for example, I'll use these blueberries that more, so if the word's bigger, that means more of you typed it in. And so blueberries, many people are familiar that blueberries have these phytonutrients or antioxidants. The darker, the deeper the color something has, the more phytonutrient it has, okay? Blueberries have something called anthocyanins in it. You don't need to memorize that by any means, but that deep blue color, I actually included it on this slide right here. These are actually all my own photos. Well, I wasn't the photographer. These are me in the photos, right? But there's that's a beautiful blue color that you don't have to do any editing to, right? Those are phytonutrients in that product. Now, one thing that I want to mention is that someone mentioned cauliflower. Cauliflower is my favorite roasted vegetable. Cauliflower is usually white, right? You can get it in other colors like orange, green, and also purple, right? What's tricky is that just because it's white doesn't mean it doesn't have phytonutrients. There's actually a phytonutrient that makes it white. So generally speaking, anything that has more color has more phytonutrients, but it's not, cauliflower has awesome phytonutrients in it too. Awesome. Thanks for participating in that, everybody. All right, now this is very small. I know that. I'm going to see, I don't know if I can zoom in maybe a little bit on my screen. Okay, now this pulls into some of the different markers of why nutrition can play a role, right? And that depends on where you fall into your medical knowledge or your science knowledge or whatnot. But you don't really need to fully understand this, but this is the exposure. So greater body fatness, how it can impact the system and how it's effective. So the reason I want to show this with you is I'm going to talk specifically about lower fruit and vegetable intake right now, okay? If we have lower fruit and vegetable intake, then we have lower dietary fiber intake, which can lead to inflammation, oxidative stress, something called low butyrate. Butyrate is something that's produced in the microbiome if you have enough the good bacteria for it. Now, from what I already taught you, is that if that is happening, then we have reduced apoptosis, which is again that programmed cell death. We want apoptosis to happen. Then we also have increased proliferation. Proliferation is when those cells rapidly divide, grow, rapidly divide and grow, and can cause progression, right? So it can also increase inflammation, which is what we know is not necessarily good, reduce apoptosis. And again, so the reason I'm showing this to you is that if we have low fruit and vegetable intake, it's not just because fruits and vegetables are healthy for us and we should all eat them. There's so much more behind it, right? We want to try to help reduce inflammation, reduce apoptosis, okay? The other thing that I wanted to show you is greater intake of red and processed meat. That increases something called exposure to nitrates and nitrites, which can reduce apoptosis, increase inflammation, etc. I'm a very, very big believer as an oncology dietitian and as a teacher to teach you the why, the what, and then the how. Because I feel that if I can teach you this and you can have a general understanding of like, man, that broccoli is good for me because it contains sulforaphane, it increases my fiber and can help reduce inflammation, you're going to be much more inclined to want to include it into your diet, right? I didn't have to teach any of you before you came here today that fruits and vegetables are healthy for you, right? I don't need to tell you that. But if I can tell you why and how beneficial they are, you're much more unlikely inclined to do it. And then, of course, I want to teach you the how, right? If 10 years ago, I did not like cauliflower at all. Now it's my favorite thing, and we buy like 3 heads of it every time we go to the grocery store. And we only have 2 adults and 2 little children in the house, right? So it's also amazing how your body can, it's amazing how your body can also change in its taste preferences over time as well, okay? So again, you'll have access to the slide if you wanna look at it closer. And that report, that third expert report, goes into greater detail of explaining this if you want to understand some of these things a little bit deeper. You know, me as a dietitian, I know a lot more about the mTOR and all that kind of stuff, but you can kind of ignore that cell function and from there. So, okay, now I'm gonna zoom back out a little bit. There we go. Now, one thing that I wanted to emphasize is the difference between a plant-based diet and a vegan diet. They can be used interchangeably, which is okay. However, with this big boom of plant-based foods on the market, which I think is awesome, right? We have to keep in mind is that we want to try to focus on foods that are whole and unprocessed as much as possible, okay? Many of these plant-based foods that are on the market are still highly processed and are not necessarily good for us, okay? So for example, a plant-based diet, here are some of the differences. It's whole food focused, right? We want that orange, not necessarily the orange juice, okay? Because if we take that orange and juice it, we lose that fiber, and that fiber is super important for this whole process. It doesn't mean that the orange juice is necessarily bad, because it's still gonna have some phytonutrients and vitamin C, but you're gonna get a whole lot more benefit if you eat the orange itself, okay? So as whole as possible as you can. Now, I believe in whole foods all the way. But I had someone tell me like, oh, you probably never eat processed foods. That is not true, okay? I live in a busy lifestyle as well. I am a human, I'm not perfect. You do the best you can. It doesn't mean avoid every single processed food because there also needs to be some realism to all of this, right? So keep that in mind. So plant-based diet includes fruits, veggies, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, where, you know, on the plant-based diet, the vegan diet, it may not necessarily be whole foods, and it also could include high amounts of processed or what's called meat analogs or like fake meats. They recently released a study also that studied, it was a crossover study, which means that the study participants ate the processed meat for a certain amount of time and then switched over to real meat for a period of time and then studied some outcomes. And they actually did show there was small improvements of health outcomes in the vegan processed meat over some of the other like red meats and sausages. So there could be some benefit of eating those foods, but I usually encourage people, those are very good transitional foods or every once in a while type foods. All right, so a plant-based diet may or may not be 100% plant-based, where a vegan diet, it's more actually related to their lifestyle, which means individuals that classify themselves as vegan would also avoid honey, any leather products, etc. Now, I would describe myself as somebody who's vegan just to make it easy for other people. I personally choose to eat honey still. That's my personal decision. A real vegan would very much be not call yourself vegan if you eat honey, right? So there are different spectrums, right? And it doesn't matter, you do you, right? I'm a big believer of that. Plant-based diets are high in fiber, phytochemicals, vitamins, and minerals, or a vegan diet can vary greatly in nutrient composition. And also, most people that choose a plant-based diet or a whole food plant-based diet, they're usually motivated by health, environment, and or animal advocacy, where vegan diets are more likely motivated by animal advocacy or environment. So it could be a whole mix of things as well. I personally made the transition to a plant-based diet for health reasons. I do like that it's better for the environment as well. That definitely trickles in for me, but it definitely was motivated by health. All right, so I want you to think about this a little bit, grab your interactive phone or whatever it might be. When you think of a plant-based diet or a plant-forward diet in comparison to the traditional diet, and when I think traditional diet, I'm talking about the standard diet that most people eat in America, how would you rank the following statements, okay? If you put a 1, that means you highly disagree. Put a 5, it means that you highly agree. So number 1, plant-based diets are nutritionally deficient. Number 2, plant-based diets are nutritious, but not delicious. And then also, last one, I have to think about too many variables if I wanted to consider a plant-based diet. Meaning that maybe you're focused on like, man, if I'm gonna eat a plant-based diet, I have to think about complementing proteins and supplementing this and all these variables that might play a role, okay? All right, so we're getting some results that are coming in a little bit closer to the highly disagree. You're kind of coming out where I expected, especially on the bottom one, that you have to think about too many variables if you wanted to consider a plant-based diet. I have a lot of people that I work with that say, man, Allison, I would love to be plant-based. I would love to be even 100% plant-based, but I could never give up, it's the biggest one, cheese, right? That's what most people say in the plant-based diet. I don't know how to do it because my spouse wouldn't be supportive, or I don't want to have to supplement with this and this. I'm worried about my protein intake. I'm worried about my calcium intake. I don't want to, it's just too hard to do that, right? So that's kind of where that question came from. All right, so we have most of you who feel like, yes, plant-based diets, you disagree that they're nutritionally deficient. However, looks like there's some questions there. Some say maybe a little hesitant of whether they're delicious or not. And then, but more so on the lines that having to consider too many variables if somebody wanted to consider that. And that is super common among the people that I work with. Thank you for participating. But I'm here to tell you that research shows that most Americans actually don't get enough vitamins A, C, E, and the minerals magnesium, potassium, and of course, fiber. In fact, 93% of people don't get enough vitamin E. 97% of people don't get enough fiber. On the flip side of that, a lot of people are very concerned about protein on the plant-based diet. In all actuality, only 3% of Americans are deficient in protein. Okay. Research also shows that vegans and vegetarians in the United States eat 70% more protein than they actually need. That's vegans and vegetarians. Okay. So we do not have a protein deficiency in the United States. We have a fiber deficiency. Okay. And then also 98% don't get enough potassium. But on the flip side, a whole food plant-based diet is actually naturally high in many of these things that most people are deficient in, such as A, C, E, magnesium, potassium, and fiber. So it is actually not a nutrition deficient dietary approach. But like any dietary approach, there are some considerations and nutrients to pay closer attention to. Now, I want to say this by saying, no matter what dietary pattern you follow, you will always need to pay attention to some nutrients, whether you're plant-based, whether you're plant-forward, whether you're omnivorous, whether you're carnivore, right? Like whatever spectrum you fall on, right? There are all nutrients of concern and considerations, no matter what your dietary approach is. So that's a very common misconception when people think about plant-based is like, oh, it's way too nutritional deficient. Actually, across the board, most of us have some nutritional deficiencies that we need to make up for no matter what. So I wanted to point those out a little bit. So these are some of the most common nutrients that a lot of people think about when they think about plant-based diets being deficient. I already told you about protein, is that Most people are not protein deficient, and typically, unfortunately, the individuals that are protein deficient in this country, unfortunately, they typically are struggling with eating disorders that they have, they don't consume enough calories. If they simply consumed enough calories, they would meet their protein needs. Omega-3s, they do tend to be lower in vegans and vegetarians. However, it is a misconception that we can only get these nutrients from fish, where we can actually get them from sources such as flax, chia, hemp, or walnuts. But in some cases, an algae-based supplement may be appropriate. So algae can actually get those omega-3s and the fish get their omega-3 fatty acids by eating algae. So you're just going back to that source. Iron, it's actually been shown that vegetarians consume actually more iron than omnivores. However, there is a little bit of a consideration here. We have to optimize what's called bioavailability, or the ability to use that iron. I work with my clients to make sure that we're doing that, and making sure that the iron that they're getting, they're being able to use it by their body. And sometimes that's just like food pairing. If you are eating plant-based iron, such as beans, you want to make sure that you're pairing it with something that has vitamin C in it, such as bell peppers or a fruit. That actually enhances the bioavailability, or your body's ability to use that iron. Vitamin D status depends on your exposure and intake of vitamin D. There is actually very few foods that naturally have any vitamin D in it. Most of the foods that we all consume, whether you're a vegan, omnivorous eater, or whatever spectrum you're on, most people are deficient in vitamin D, especially living here in the United States and Wisconsin. So I usually recommend, so the deficiencies are not exclusive to vegans and vegetarians. And I typically recommend people that they have their vitamin D tested, so that way they can know where their status lies before they would supplement. Zinc, research shows that although the intakes in vegans and vegetarians are slightly lower in zinc, they still have normal zinc concentrations, meaning like in their blood, they have enough zinc. Iodine is another thing. But actually iodine can actually be easily increased through iodized salt. And iodine actually usually comes from the soil, and unfortunately how we've agricultured our lands over time has actually reduced the amount of iodine. So that's where that comes from, not necessarily by eating plants or not eating plants. Calcium, we definitely want to emphasize high calcium rich foods, which can easily be done in a plant-based diet. And then the one exception to, if somebody does want to be exclusively plant-based, they should take a vitamin B12 supplement. And again, that is, B12 is actually created by microbes or bacteria. So typically, historically, when we would eat plant-based foods, let's say we ate a carrot from the ground, we would brush it off, right? And we would eat that carrot that still had some dirt residue. That would have the microbes be able to create B12. Our sanitation practices and our agricultural practices have unfortunately made plants no longer a reliable source of vitamin B12. And that also carries over to the fact that most of our animal feed is fortified with B12. So that's where that becomes a good source. All right. I know we want to get to Q&A for sure, but I also think recommendations for implementation are very important. So let's get into that a little bit. Things to keep in mind. Plant-based nutrition does not need to mean restriction, okay? And I know that sounds weird if you're maybe first hearing that and you're like, wait, you're telling me that I need to eat a lot more plants and consider reducing my animal-based products. That's restriction. No, there's still this back and forth of, I believe that there's this balance between nourishment and also making sure that we're finding joy in food, okay? I think nutrition is amazing and what it can do for our bodies, but I also love food, right? I love to eat it. I love to make it for people. And where is that common ground that we can meet for you as an individual, right? Because that same common ground, you know, if you think about that Venn diagram of nutrition and joy, where do those two meet? That's going to be different for every single one of us here. So I want you to think about that for you and what that looks like. Okay, it doesn't have to be restriction. And believe it or not, you might not believe me saying this, but I've had almost all of my clients tell me this as well after they get into it for a little while, is that plant-based, plant-forward diets actually opens up your world to more flavors, more foods than you would have ever experienced in your whole life. right? I eat a wider variety of foods and flavors that I eat now than I did 10 years ago. Okay, it doesn't have to mean restriction. It can still include ice cream. I think I saw someone talk about bacon. It can still include bacon. I just really recommend reducing it overall. Okay. Also, again, kind of on that same thing that I just said, aim to identify your own goals and values and seek a professional that can help you meet those goals. Just like I said, your goal is going to be different than my goal, and our lifestyles are different, right? Like who you are as whether it's a grandparent or a parent and what season of life you're in or not, like that's all going to impact those goals and values and how you approach this. Okay. Everyone is different. I have a twin sister. We are very, very similar, but we're also very different. Okay. Our goals are not 100% aligned the same, and that's okay. Right. And we're twins and we're used to being compared 100% of the time in our life. Right. And we just accept that we're very different. Intuitive eating can mean plant-based eating. That's very goes along the line of restriction. I work with my clients a lot in intuitive eating. Intuitive eating is the concept of listening to your body intuitively, whether it's hungry or not, and when to eat and what to eat. A very simple example that I can give you, and I share this example as a personal example. Like one day there was these plant-based vegan brownies that my mom made. I love homemade treats. Like that's one of my things. Like if it's on the table, I'll probably want to eat it, right? And I was like, no. In my mind, I'm thinking to myself, I'm gonna go for something a little bit healthier, even though I really wanted those brownies, right? So I ended up eating a somewhat sugary bowl of cereal, right? And then I ate another bowl of cereal because what did I really want? I really wanted the brownie. So what do you think happened? I still ate the brownie after I ate the bowls of cereal, right? So if I had just eaten the brownie and been done with it, it would have been so much better. That's an example of intuitive eating. Intuitive eating doesn't mean that you eat whatever you want, whenever you want, and have no consideration. It is a learning process, and it takes some skill. But plant-based eating can be very intuitive eating. I have a coworker that I work with that comes into my group community and gave a presentation on intuitive eating and how it meets plant-based and how it can be together, where it's often thought that they can't collide, but they can. And I also recommend starting with slow, gradual changes, right? If most people are like this, right? If you make a to-do list and you think of all the things that you have to do, whether it be work, personal, house care, whatever, and the list is like 50 long, right? If you're like me, like, no, that's too much. I'm just going to do nothing, right? Very similar things happen when you make dietary changes, is that if you're like, okay, I need to do this, and I better start doing that, it's very overwhelming. When instead, if you just pick one or two things to work on and get good at, and then get better from there, that's a much better approach. Most people do not make the transition overnight to plant-based eating. There are some stories out there of people that do, and they might have very extreme medical needs to do that, but most people don't do it overnight, myself included. I took a very slow and steady process to it, and that was my journey. But that's very similar to a lot of people. You just start including more things. I like to think about adding before you subtract. Just add more of these fruits and vegetables before you completely get rid of the bacon if you don't want to, right? So consider that. The New American Plate, which is from the American Institute for Cancer Research, they recommend what's like a different stage. And the reason I show this is to show you what it can look like to slowly adapt what your plate looks like. You know, we have the old American plate on the top left that has the meat, the peas, and the mashed potatoes. And then, you know, the next step is that you have a smaller portion of the red meat, bigger portion of the veggies, and a different type of starch, right? And then you move over to stage 3 where you have a little bit of chicken breast, and then you have all these wonderful things. Or another option would be like completely plant-based, or just like a sprinkling of chicken on top. This is to show you that there's an example that you can slowly progress, and that's okay too. Or perhaps another option, I'm showing this one because it's completely plant-based. You could do that as well. I like to think of something called the plant-based plate, okay? It means that when you think about your meals, you have 4 main things. You have non-starchy vegetable, you have a whole grain or a starchy vegetable, a legume, or which is like beans, tofu, or that's where your lean meat would be, like chicken breast, fish, etc. And then on the side, you typically have fruit. That's kind of what I'm displaying here, right? So you have some non-starchy veggies on the left side of the plate, makes up about half the plate. This is a picture of quinoa. Quinoa can be a really great whole grain. And then you have some legume and fruit on the side. This would be a nutritionally complete meal. And in that handout that I mentioned, I included that you can download is the plant-based plate, where I have a diagram of what the plant-based plate looks like with examples. And then I even have recipe examples and meal examples. And again, that's in the PDF that you can download after today's presentation if you want. Goes a little bit more into this. All right, so when you're getting started, other consideration is to understand your why. Okay, just like your why is going to be very different from somebody else. The thing that actually started me on the plant-based journey is not just helping my cancer patients that I worked with, but also my own journey with infertility. Okay, and I had slowly started removing things out of my diet I did my research, of course, in plant-based nutrition, fertility, etc. I have PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I won't tell you the whole story, but I have two beautiful girls that are very healthy. And although there are many factors in fertility and achieving pregnancy, I believe that nutrition played a huge role. My why was having babies. Okay, that was my why. And there's lots of other things that help me stick with it. Seek to understand the what and why, and it will bring you to the how, right? So it's just like I was talking about how sharing with you, like why we talk about this. Again, you're gonna be motivated if you can understand the why a little bit more. Also, don't focus on perfection, but instead progress. Okay, one of my favorite quotes is, don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. I am the first to tell you that I do not have a perfect diet. I do not have a perfect lifestyle. There are always things that I can work on, but if you focus on perfection, progress isn't going to happen. Okay, just focus on getting a little bit better every single day, or every week, or every month, whatever it might be. Find a community of support, which seems like you guys have really awesome support here. So I'm so glad that you have that. And then also, if you're seeking a professional help, ensure that you're working with someone that's truly credentialed, but also someone that you feel good working with. I always tell people that I might not be the perfect personality fit for somebody else, right? Or somebody will come to me and say like, hey, I really want to learn this from you. I want to work with you. And then we chat a little bit more, and I'm like, you know what? I don't think I'm a great fit for your goals, but I know somebody that is, right? You know, work with somebody that you feel very comfortable working with. And that can be really helpful in your progress. I actually saw this last night when I was finalizing these slides here. And so I thought it was a really great quote. It says, in the gym, the weight doesn't get easier to lift, you just get stronger. In life, events don't get easier to handle. You just become better equipped to handle them. Okay. This very much applies to so many different aspects of our life, including this journey for a lot of you. Okay. It's not always easy, but you're better equipped to handle it. All right, final thoughts. I'm just going to move through so we can answer some questions, but plant-based diets can provide significant health benefits, especially as it relates to cancer, but other chronic diseases. If we're ensuring nutrition adequacy, meaning that we're eating enough, right? That's often a lot of people's issues is that, man, Alison, I'm just so tired when I'm eating this plant-based diet. I can almost tell you that they're not eating enough carbohydrates. Okay, we need to eat enough and the right types of foods, and we can be nutritionally adequate. Supplementation may be necessary, but that's a very individualized approach. And then also sometimes people find it important to consider the environment and animal advocacy. So that might be something that you're interested in, and that's another motivation. Some of my favorite resources, these will all be links for when you get the PDF. Again, you know, just a shameless plug of Wholesome LLC, which is my website. I have recipes on there. I have blog posts. You can also reach out to me, but the American Institute for Cancer Research, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, Cook for Your Life. Cook for Your Life might also be helpful for many of you who are still undergoing cancer treatment. You can pick out recipes and foods that are based on some of the side effects you're experiencing. So for example, if somebody is experiencing nausea, you can filter some of those recipes and it will come up with some that are going to be easier for nausea. So I think Cook for Your Life is a really awesome resource. And then of course, the World Cancer Fund and the third expert report that we reviewed a little bit more today. All right, so after participating in this presentation, again, this is completely anonymous. How do you feel about using a plant-based or forward nutrition approach? You can use a couple words, you can use a sentence. Are you feeling overwhelmed? Do you feel empowered? Do you feel like you learned a lot? Just let me know how you're feeling. And some of those will start popping up. And while those are coming in, I just saw one thing come in, and it said, is ginger or mint good for nausea? Yes, ginger is awesome for nausea, and then specifically peppermint can be good for nausea. You just have to make sure it's real peppermint. So for example, like I think it's the Lifesavers brand. If you look actually at the back of their products, it's actually like fake. So you want to make sure you're using true peppermint. That can be helpful for nausea. All right, interested to learn more. I've been working towards this for months now. Awesome. Excited to try more things based on what you presented. I'm about 80% there, not ready to let go of the cheese. I think most people can relate to you. Cheese was the last thing that I let go of personally. Motivated or reinvigorated. Awesome. Reinforced to continue to shift my eating patterns. I'm optimistic, continue with a plant forward incorporation. Awesome. I'm so glad to hear so many of these things. I'm working towards less meat and have found some really good recipes. Have a CSA veggie share to do more this summer. Awesome. These are such great ways for you to incorporate new things. My twin and I went to college together and we lived together. And this was when I was going to business school, so I wasn't even close to dietitian, but we grew up kind of picky eaters. So we made a vow to ourselves, like, we have to go and learn how to eat more fruits and vegetables. So together, every time we'd go to the grocery store, we'd pick out one new fruit or vegetable. We'd come back and we'd like YouTube or Google search like best way to make cauliflower or something. And that's how we started to learn to eat more of these things. You just have to try. I would use this for a few meals and would start with making a grain bowl type meal. I love grain bowls. Not sure, I have to press enter, I think, to stop the scroll. Let's see here. Not sure where I would go from there. Just a few good recipes to make it happen. Absolutely. Just find a few that you love. Hopefully you can find some on my website. A lot of people really love that and motivated to reduce meat consumption. Awesome. Thanks,
Just
guys.
Alison, a couple others that have come in the chat and regarding processed meat, is it still as high a carcinogen if it's nitrate free?
It's a great question. So I'm gonna pull to the next slide just so well, that way you guys can, grab all of the slides and stuff if you want, but this is a great question. So unfortunately, this is kind of a complicated question, but unfortunately, if it's nitrate-free deli meat, for example, it does not reduce the risk. And the reason for it is because it's not necessarily nitrates and nitrites themselves that are cancer causing, but it's the nitrates and nitrites found in the animal products or the processed meats, coupled with something called amines and amides. Amines and amides are naturally present in meat. And so when we eat those things, they convert to nitrosamines and nitrosamides. Those are the cancer-causing substances, unfortunately. So actually, things like dark leafy green veggies and beet greens and stuff actually are very high in nitrates, and they're actually protective. So it's actually the amines and the amides that cause the issue because they're naturally present in processed meats. So unfortunately, that doesn't reduce the risk. I wish that were the case, because there are products out there that are nitrate free or are naturally cured. Because if you look at the ingredient list, it still says, except for those nitrates naturally occurring in celery juice or whatever natural, the nitrates are still somewhat present, but it's the amines and the amides.
Got it. Next question. There's a few questions that I wanted to jump in here, but please, everybody, grab that scan so you can get your email. You can get the slides here.
And the handout comes with it too.
Yeah. So someone asks, I've had GERD since chemo over 5 years now. I can't seem to narrow down what's causing it. Would you advise talking to a nutritionist, or should I just keep going? So by the way, a beer a day seems to help calm her stomach down.
Yeah, interesting. There are several things to kind of look in and consider. Unfortunately, chemotherapy can cause and exacerbate some of those issues. There could be some other underlying things. So working with a nutritionist, a dietitian could be helpful to also see if there are other lying things that are happening that could potentially be helpful, that could be causing the GERD. So interesting that beer helps to calm it. I don't think that's super common of a thing to help, but if it helps, limit it to one. It would be my recommendation. But GERD can be incredibly uncomfortable too. So, and we want to make sure that we have GERD kind of looked at too, because it can cause some of that inflammation in the esophagus and everything. So I wish I had a more specific answer for that individual today, but it would require more individual attention.
Great. Next question is thoughts on low-fat diet.
Great question. So a lot of the research when we look at low fat is like, I'm actually going to close my door. I hear my 15-month-old coming up the stairs. She's in the mama phase. Mama. She's only 15 months old, so she wants me, especially as daddy's going to take care of. So, so the low fat diet. So when we think about a whole plant-based food approach, right, when we're focusing on those whole foods, this naturally already lower in fat. Okay. So when we think about a low fat diet, I want you to think about a naturally low fat diet, not the low fat craze of the 1990s, right? When we talk about Snackwell cookies and reduced fat peanut butter and like those types of things, that is not the low fat that we're looking for. We're looking for naturally lower fat products, such as fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, and some small amounts of nuts and seeds. Now, when we specifically look at some of the data when it comes to different cancer types, we do have more data on it, but prostate and breast cancer specifically has more significant benefits of a naturally low fat diet. And I say naturally low fat because it's plant forward and plants are naturally very low in fat, with the exception of avocado, nuts, and seeds. We still want small amounts of those in the diet, but we don't want a high fat diet. But mostly the fats we want to avoid are saturated fats. That is the biggest fat we want to try to avoid, and trans fats, but there's not as many trans fats in the diet anymore. Specifically, lower your saturated fat for all cancer types. That's very important.
Okay, great. I'm going to turn the recording off now.
Sure.
So hang on.